So the whole thing about political correctness, the thing that I find so depressing about political correctness, it's just an instrument for silence, and it's a one-edged sword. Silence in politics is a one-edged sword. It is meant to cut down people like me who believe in liberty, individual liberty, thinking, saying, doing what you want, spending your money the way you want, not the way Elizabeth Warren wants or Alexandria Occasional Cortex wants. The way you want to spend your money, it's yours. You made it. Spend it the way you want, not on something the government thinks it should be spent on. That's what I believe. And that is what I think the sword of political correctness is meant to cut down. Sometimes, as in this Virginia story, it swings the other way, and the dull end of the sword maybe knocks a left-winger in the head, but that is not what it's intended for. It is really just intended for cutting down right-wingers and silencing them. That you can't think of a left-winger who's been banned from a campus. You can't think of a left-winger who's been deplatformed or kicked off Twitter or kicked out of Facebook. You can't think of a person who is looking at who is making those decisions who's not a left-winger. It is all bent on silencing the people who believe in individual freedom, because that's the whole point of it. It is to not let not let anybody say that the whole point is to take control of power for elites. That's what it's for. That is the only thing that it is for. So, you've got this guy Northam, and obviously the issue should be that his radical stance on abortion, his idea that you can let a baby die if it just affects the mental health of a mother. He said it on the radio. It wasn't taken out of context. He said, if they make this decision, the government should have no say in this. The doctor and the woman should just decide if they want to leave that baby to die. That's what he should be under fire for. But the left will do anything to turn the corner. So even in this case, even though in this case the political correctness is being used against a left-winger, it really is being used to save the central sacrament of the left, which is abortion, because that is, once you have the power of life and death over people, you have all the power there is. And even now, if these guys did not have a double standard, they would have no standard at all, even though a lot of Democrats are calling for his resignation. Why? Because they will lose the hammer they use against Donald Trump of misinterpreting everything he says as racist. They would lose that hammer if they let Northam stay in power, and he will not go. He is clinging to the governorship so far. He says he doesn't want to leave because then he's just a racist forever, and I sympathize with that, even though I think he should go for the baby comment. But just take a look at MSNBC, where, let me just get my clip sheet here, where you have two left-wing reporters, Andrea Mitchell and Washington Post's Ruth Marcus, saying, well, maybe we're going too far in asking him to resign. And just as they're talking, imagine that this was a Republican governor, as CNN tried to say it was.
Is there potential blowback here? A risk of appearing too politically correct, something that may turn off attempts to woo the Trump voters, the Trump Democrats back in?
I think that the actual real world risk seems to me to be whether we're moving with just way too much rapidity when there is a little bit of factual development to figure out here. And I don't want anybody to get too alarmed by what I'm saying. In other words, he first admitted or said that it was him.
And apologized in a video message.
Then he came out with this other explanation. Is there any reason whatsoever to credit this other explanation? It has not emerged yet. But so maybe there is some risk in being precipitous.
So, they weren't talking about this with Brett Kavanaugh. They wouldn't be talking about this with any Republican. And by the way, it's MSNBC, so I'm not hitting them for being left wing, although the Washington Post, which spent $5 million on a Super Bowl ad to make them look like heroes, which they could have saved simply by reporting the news honestly. They wouldn't have had to do that. But the Washington Post reporter is showing herself to be a left winger, but I'm not hitting them for being left wing. I'm hitting them for being hypocrites. And that came out even more as the lieutenant governor got in trouble, which is kind of a comedy. They're having a comedy of errors at this point. By the time they're finished, the only guy they're going to have left to take the governorship is going to be like a 150-year-old guy who's actually a racist, who's actually back from the old South. So now Justin Fairfax is the lieutenant governor, and everybody was very excited because how appropriate that you'd be able to replace the guy who posed either in blackface or as a Ku Klux Klanman on his 36 years ago. You'd be able to replace him with the black lieutenant governor. He is now the story comes out that in 2004, a woman accused him of attacking her in her hotel room. He says it was a consensual sexual relationship. And he also hinted that it may be, I mean, this is the part I kind of like, that it may have been Ralph Northam, the governor, who leaked the story. Here's Justin Fairfax talking to the press about this.
Collective PAC, they said that you believe that the governor's team is spreading misinformation about your team. Can you comment on that, please, sir?
The Collective PAC has, made its statement, and
Do
so
you believe it?
I don't know precisely where this is coming from. We've heard different things, but here's the thing: does anybody think it's any coincidence that on the eve of potentially my being elevated, that's when this uncorroborated smear comes out? Does anybody believe that's a coincidence? I don't think anybody believes that's a coincidence. Again, particularly with something. This was not the first time this was brought up. It was a year ago. This was brought up, and yet the Post, who investigated it for 3 months, dropped the story, did not do it, and they did not do it because it was uncorroborated, and it's uncorroborated because it's not true. And so it goes away for a year and then crops back up right at this moment. You don't have to be cynical. You don't have to understand politics to understand when someone's trying to manipulate a process to harm someone's character without any basis whatsoever.
That's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to have the lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia blaming the governor of the state of Virginia for this leak to keep him, as he says, from being elevated. I mean, he wasn't elected governor. It's like he obviously has a lot of concern over the governor. Gee, I'm sorry he's going through this. Could he leave now so I could be elevated? It actually is like a total soap opera. If that is in fact what's going on, Virginians should be asking themselves, maybe you should vote Republicans, Virginians. I mean, maybe you'd have a little bit less of this, although I'm not sure that's true either. You certainly have seemed to elected a group of backstabbing scoundrels. But he said in there that the Washington Post killed the story. Now, the Washington Post didn't say they thought the story was untrue. They said there was no corroborating evidence. And we know the Washington Post has a very strict policy of never publishing accusations by women without corroboration if the person being accused is a Democrat. That's their journalistic integrity rests on that. I mean, just remember, go back in time. I know it's a long time. Many of you were only a few months younger then and can't remember so far back. But remember that incredible assault on the reputation of Brett Kavanaugh when story after story after story came out saying we must believe all women. The New York Times must have run 3 pieces, if not more, of women saying, well, I was attacked and therefore Brett Kavanaugh was guilty. That was the line. This happened to me, therefore Brett Kavanaugh was guilty. And, why isn't that happening now? Surely other women have been assaulted. Why aren't we believing the woman who accused Justin Fairfax? Why didn't the Washington Post run with that story? Democrat. That's why. That's the whole answer. Because he's a Democrat. They didn't want to hurt a Democrat. They'd never do it to a Democrat. That's why. And so for the Washington Post to come out and take out that story, standing on dead journalists, standing on the reputation of journalists who lost their lives, and say, oh, look at us, we're the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness, democracy dies in phoniness and self-regard. I mean, they are just complete phonies. The silence is a one-edged sword. It is meant to silence people who believe that the individual, no matter who he is, should be allowed to speak, allowed to live, allowed to think for himself, even when things get ugly, even when he does things that even I would disapprove of. He should be allowed to speak, and that is who they use the silence for. And by the way, it's funny. When I started out to be a mystery writer. I wrote a series of pseudonymous mysteries, the John Wells mysteries. They were nominated for the Edgar twice. One of them won for the Edgar, a book called The Rain. You can still get them. They're still online on Amazon. The reporter was a hero. He was my hero. I used reporters as heroes because I had been a reporter and because they kind of spoke to me about what I was doing, the idea of searching for the truth and all that. And then one day I consciously stopped. I thought, true crime has a reporter as hero, although he's the reporter that everybody hates because he's politically incorrect. But still, there came a point when I said, I will not use reporters as heroes anymore because they're dishonest, because they're all on one side, because they will not report a story that hurts the Democrats. They will not report a story that is left-wing. And, it's a little unfair to accuse the reporters, the guys in the street, because a lot of them would report anything. A lot of reporters are just kind of natural animals going after the powerful. It's the people in charge. It's the people at the editorial level and the people at the management level who are silencing those reporters. In the old days, those reporters would quit, but now there's nowhere for them to go, so they don't quit. They are being taught the lesson of silence. This is the lesson that the deplatformers, that the social justice mobs, that all of these people are trying to teach us, the people who take Kevin Hart off the Oscars, they're all trying to teach us the lesson of silence, in that silence, they will get the power. That is the idea. You know, it's really interesting. The other thing that happened yesterday that really got to me was Liam Neeson coming out with this story. He is promoting a new movie. What's the name of his movie? It's called Cold Pursuit, and it's a revenge story. And so somebody on the Independent, a British newspaper, asked him how he got into that part. And he said, well, let's see if he'll tell the story here. He's retelling it on Good Morning America.
I remembered an incident nearly 40 years ago where a very dear friend of mine was brutally raped. And I was out of the country, and when I came back, she told me about this. And she handled the situation herself and her rapist incredibly bravely, I have to say that. But I had never felt this feeling before, which was a primal urge to lash out. I asked her, did you know the person? It was a man. No. His race? She said he was a black man. I thought, okay. And after that, there were some nights I went out deliberately into black areas in this city, looking to be set upon so that I could unleash physical violence. And I did it for, I'd say maybe 4 or 5 times, until I caught myself on. And it really shocked me, this primal urge I had.
So, you know, this is a funny story because the GMA interviewer is a black lady. I don't know her name. Do you guys know who that is? She gives a very sympathetic interview, you know, and Liam Neeson said, well, you know, if she had told me the guy was a Scotsman or a Welshman, I'd have gone after Scotsman and Welshman, so it wasn't black racism and all this stuff. And Twitter lit up briefly, and they were going after him. But let me tell you something. Liam Neeson knows what he's doing. He's a movie star. He's been a movie star for a long time. He knows that no matter what people say, no matter how they scold him, the girls are going like, wow, Liam Neeson went out with a sap to get revenge for a rape because he was protective, he was manly, he was being tough. He knows he's putting himself forward as a badass, basically, and the racial thing is going to get him some press, but he's not going to be taken down because the silence has a purpose. Political correctness has a purpose. It's not to destroy men like Liam Neeson, though they'll do it if they can get away with it just for the power. It is to silence people like me, silence people who say, you know, that the individual has a right to make his own decisions. Silence is a one-edged sword, and that is the reason I think the most important fight we're in, the most important fight is the fight to keep the right to speak without being destroyed. It's not enough. It's not enough that the government can't silence us. You have to be able to keep your job. You have to be able to feed your family. You have to be able to keep some shred of your reputation. You shouldn't be torn to bits every time you are caught out in some stupid thing that happened 30 years ago. It's just insane, and it has only one purpose, even when it ricochets and hits a left-winger in the head like it did in Virginia.